Hi, folks, and welcome to another real and raw conversation. That's what I've been doing here so far every Wednesday. Myself and Marco, always with a good lineup. But today, I think we beat all the expectations. We have people diving in from all sorts of countries. So we have Kimann, Schultz, who is diving in from the Midwest in the States. You might remember her. She was in my show sometime in spring or summer last year. We have Erez with a familiar face for those who join us on Wednesday. He's directly from Tel Aviv. We have Niram Ferretti, who has been with us at least a couple of times. And as you may remember, he is based in Milan. And we have Otter, who was with me at the beginning of the year, if I remember well, and he is based in Budapest. And like the previous sessions on Wednesday, I'm not by myself. I'm with my co-host, Marco Alexander in Jerusalem. And today we have a hot topic. We're going to discuss free speech. I'm not going to drag myself here in comments. I want the guests to provide their insights. I think there's plenty to be said. Free speech is under assault. It's being attacked from many fronts, but I think there is room to put it in a place again. There is a price to speak our minds, but maybe there is a price for not to speak our minds. And let's see what's the best avenue to pursue in these complicated times we are living in. So if you are into this sort of topic, stay around for the next 19 minutes. To be great if you can press those three buttons below, subscribe if you haven't, share with someone who is into this topic that they can join the conversation. By the way, there's a chat box open because we want this to be interactive as we have done in the previous editions. And if you are satisfied with the content we delivered, I'll be very pleased if you can award the thumbs up below. So, Marco, over to you.
Okay, so freedom of speech is seen as a central pillar of Western democracies, but does it work when a common moral framework, let alone a shared moral vocabulary, cease to exist? Is the concept of free speech a value we should cling to at all costs, or should it be restricted to those who adhere to Western values? Could it be that it is being exploited by forces that ultimately seek to undermine the free flow of ideas that underpin liberal societies, or to spread ideas that seek to change the social, cultural, and religious landscape of Western countries? And I think we need to delve into this and give things a little bit more thought, because it's not quite as simple as it sounds. The whole notion of freedom and freedom of speech, we never really question these assumptions in a time where we live in a supermarket of values where we very often pick and choose what we like. And it becomes very difficult to have a common moral language, as it were. And we see this in Western societies in particular. Something is happening both in the United States and in Europe. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kimann. What are your perceptions of the notion of free speech in one of the lands of free speech par excellence, where you have some very stringent constitutional guarantees? How are things proceeding?
And that becomes more evident with the news of the world as I am hearing it. And of course, we have so much lively conflict here as well. I am sitting in a Starbucks coffee shop in the Midwest. We're traveling today, so I am in big business franchise. And so the free market, that is one of the things that has made this country what it is. I also believe applies completely to the free market of ideas and the speech and expressing thereof. Because by doing this freely, we are all free to then consume and reject and support and prop it up add value to it or take value away from it as we see fit in a very organic fashion. I look back just a few decades to what we had where virtue was the driver and the denominator. We wound up with what was called prohibition. And all that did is it took the freedom to imbibe underground. That didn't work. So I think where virtue is the player and the driver, that's the dangerous thing.
That's a very interesting perspective. Very good. That's I'm very happy to get that perspective. Otter, give us a little bit of a Hungarian perspective, I suppose, at the moment. You're based in Hungary, which comes in for a lot of criticism for some reason. Perhaps you can shed some light and maybe give us some perspectives from Budapest.
Well, previously, I would say some of the criticism was maybe a little bit unfounded. It was more so a buyout of the media by
Yes.
people who are sympathetic to Fidesz. Currently, though, free speech is genuinely under attack, where there's a new law being discussed, not passed yet, where if you are part of a media organization and you receive any funding from outside the borders of Hungary, whether that's a bank loan or whether it's a business interest, it doesn't matter. You can be raided by the tax authorities with the assistance of the police. And this doesn't only apply to organizations, but also to independent journalists. So hopefully such a law won't pass, but the fact that it's even being discussed is quite relevant to our topic today about
I see.
speech in the Western world.
Right. What do you say? Are there any other aspects of Hungary that disturb you, or perhaps the opposite? Perhaps it's coming in for unfair criticism.
I would say the opposite. I would feel that I am a lot more comfortable to have a controversial conversation in Hungary as opposed to the USA. So I think on a social level, there's a lot more freedom of speech. But on a governmental and also media level, it starts to get a little bit fuzzy.
Do you feel it's stifled in some way? Is something creeping in? Okay. Are there external forces which you think are influencing this?
To a degree, I'm sympathetic with Fidesz and their animosity towards NGOs and foreign influence in the country.
Right.
But when it's being used to exploit just local opposition media as well, then we have a whole different monster.
Right.
So
I see.
where does national interest and domestic interest end?
Right.
Rather, international interest and domestic interest.
It's a tough call, I suppose, and I can't really commit myself either way on that. Niram, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
Good to see you once more. How are things in Italy at the moment? Freedom of speech. We've had some. I've followed things a little more in Italy, having Italian origins and having lived there. So I've been following things in Italy, and it seems to me that free speech, to a certain extent, is being stifled by non-government actors. I've noticed some events in recent weeks, especially the pro-Palestine crowd, which tries to stop assembly of people with different opinions. And I refer to the episode at the University of Turin.
Yes, exactly. Well, on the main level, of course, here in Italy, we have no problems regarding free speech. But as you're focusing on this specific episode, it happened a few days ago. There was this meeting which was supposed to be held at the University of Turin, which was organized by a group of young Jews of from a different political spectrum, and they were just going to express their opinion about the right to study. We have the right to study, they say, and not to be interrupted and not to be put in the condition of not going to the university because people occupy classrooms and forbid us to do what we would like to do, which is simply study. The university is a place where people usually study, and they were not able to hold this meeting because about, let's say, 100, 150 people wearing kefias, which is the Palestinians which is the Palestinian, of course, Arab scarf, came into in the university and started yelling the usual slogans against Israel, against Zionism, and so the meeting was not held, and unfortunately we didn't have the police coming in, because there is this agreement here in Italy. Not all universities stick to this agreement, but there is this agreement between the University of Turin and the police forces that they don't enter in the university. They need to stay outside unless something really awful happens. Luckily, there was not an awful episode, but we had a mob more than a crowd, which was quite violent and very aggressive verbally, and sometimes, and in one occasion also aggressive physically, because there was a person who was wearing this badge, for the yellow badge for the hostages, and it was just took away violently from the lapel of his jacket. And so we have this very clear examples of people who do not allow other people to speak and to say. This was nothing really particularly political. They were just there to express, as I said at the beginning, the right to study at the university, and they were forbidden to do so.
So here we see an element of what we could say mob rule stifling freedom of speech, which I think is the correct term to apply to this. Let me turn to Erez, because I think, Erez, we have a situation in Israel which is a little bit different from other countries. We're facing a war on a number of fronts, at least 7 official fronts. Then we have the ostensible friends, let's say the fair weather friends in the various European countries, who are trying to stifle the war in Gaza to eliminate Hamas. But we also have an internal element which is rather pernicious. Now, I would like to examine an aspect of free speech and maybe make an argument in the Israeli context for limits on free speech during the time of war. And I refer especially to the episode of a gentleman called Yair Golan. Your views, please.
I was going to mention him, but I wanted to talk first about the scope of freedom of speech. I don't think that there's anyone who seriously opposes the freedom of speech. It's a value that's been consecrated in some countries. All the West basically believes in it, and it's part of the ability of a person to express him or herself and his views and his opinion, and that's fine. The problem is, or actually, there are 2 problems. First one is the free use of the free speech right. And I think, Marco, you were referring to the fact that the head of the Democrat Party in Israel said that just yesterday that the state of Israel kills babies as a hobby.
Yes.
Now,
it culminated with that. That's one aspect of what he said. Yes.
Right.
Now let me just say one thing, and I'll come back to you. Now, In Britain during the Second World War, there were serious limits on free speech in time of emergency, and I believe justifiably so. In the light of, certainly in the light of what we've seen yesterday, Britain had very severe limits on free speech during the course of World War II. Some people were indeed imprisoned. The leader of the fascist party, Sir Oswald Mosley, was imprisoned because
Lord Howe.
No, that was another one. That's Joyce. That
I know.
was Joyce. Yeah. Well, Joyce was actually sentenced to death. He was actually executed. Yeah. Anyway, so these are a few thoughts I'm throwing at you. Go ahead. I interrupted you.
Yeah. So on the one hand, a serious problem is that the freedom of speech is used to present opinions, be they moderate or extreme, as facts, without giving any context, without any comparison to other things. I would think, for example, that killing 500,000 or 800,000 people in Syria would have fitted better this description of killing babies as a hobby. But if you give no context and no comparison, then you are basically using the right of free speech to, I don't want to say slander, but misrepresent facts and paint a misleading picture. So this is one problem. The other problem is the imbalanced application of the freedom of speech. In Israel, there are 5 main TV channels. 3 of them, or I should say, three of them are pretty much tilted to the left. How to say, outlooks on life in general. And in there, if someone makes the mistake of voicing the wrong opinion, he will not only be shouted on and silenced. This would probably be his last time in those studios.
We call it being cancelled. Cancelled, I think, is the expression.
Absolutely. Cancelled, being labeled a traitor, being labeled a fascist, etc., etc. And of the 5 channels, 3 are tilted to the left of the political map and 1 to the right. And so it's not that a certain wing has a monopoly about that. But the fact is that freedom of speech, in one example, the freedom to demonstrate, is regulated by the judicial branch in Israel in very imbalanced way. So that's the second problem with the freedom of speech, which again I think everybody values and desires. So it's how we apply this freedom of speech that makes the problem, that creates the problem.
Let me just, before I hand back to Vitor, let me just suggest something, because freedom of speech to a great extent concerns and centers around individual rights. What about social rights? Suppose somebody expresses an opinion which is so deeply offensive to the collectivity. Do social rights at a certain point kick in? Does society at a certain point have the right to say to this individual, perhaps you shouldn't be part of this collectivity, or to diminish the relationship that obtains between society and a person? So I'm throwing this to the panel in general, whoever wants to kick in there.
Well,
to that, I would like to say that this comes in forms of friendships and groups and organizations we're calling it these days tribalism, we're calling it identity, that actually drives a lot of society to begin with. So on the one hand, it's a very normal process where like-minded individuals do come together. Oh, the problem right now is that we have in certain areas where a group is more dominant than the other, it can be regional, it can be topical, for instance, whether it's in the arts or it's in the sports or some other area, where then the one group wants to determine that the other side, the other opinion doesn't have the same right to be voiced. So we're using the control of our freedom, we're using our free speech in order to try to take away the freedom of others to express themselves. And that becomes a very vicious circle.
Indeed, I get your point, and I get the point, and I just like to sort of float a thought experiment. Suppose somebody does something so offensive within his rights to free speech, for example. Let's say he were to parade in the center of Jerusalem in a Nazi uniform. Okay, this is a thought experiment. Should society, should his freedom of speech in some way be contrasted by or counterbalanced by a social right? Does society have the right to reassess or recalibrate a relationship with somebody of this sort? And it could happen in the United States as well. Somebody tramples on the flag or burns the flag on a serial basis. I mean, free speech here. What do we do in such a situation if anybody wants to take up
There's
this?
an interesting case actually in the USA, the Skokie case, where neo-Nazis planned a march in a Jewish neighborhood, and the ACLU and the ADL both defended the free speech of those Nazis to do
Right.
that. So in theory, so long as there's no violence, people have the right to demonstrate that. And I do think we have an intellectual responsibility as a society to tolerate some fringe ideas, because perhaps something good may arise of them. The Nazi example may not be the best for that, but in general, if
thought
we start to
experiments,
limit,
yeah. No, I'm just saying thought experiments are by their nature extreme to try and tease out some general principle. I remember that incident, by the way. I remember the ADL said okay, and Rabbi Meir Kahan went in as well. I remember that. That was quite an important incident in the United States.
Which is such a contrast from how those organizations behave now.
Yeah. So that's you raise an interesting point. But I mean, it could be something else. Suppose we have somebody. Sorry, Vitor, I know I'm stealing a little bit of time, but I'm on a roll here. Okay, Niram, let's say, suppose we have a group of people who espouse. Let's play this little game. Consensual cannibalism. Let's put it that way.
Well, I would like to say
it exists, by the way. It's not just in the world of
sure. Well, the idea of free speech is it comes from the Enlightenment. It comes from the 18th century mainly, and it's not so far. It's not so really so ancient. We had it also in Greece, of course, but the person in the Enlightenment, it was sort of put forward, and there is this famous saying which is attributed to Voltaire, who said, I don't agree with you, but I will give my life for you to express your thoughts or your thoughts. And then we have another, I would like to cite another thinker, more recent thinker, Karl Popper, who said we cannot be tolerant with the intolerance. So there is a sort of contrast now between these two ideas of sanctifying in a certain way or worshipping the right to say to express your own ideas, but at the same time the contrast is that these ideas might be against what we believe in, not only what we believe in, but against the core values of a society. And we need to also to make I think it's very important to say this, that usually violence, physical violence, is anticipated by speech. I'm talking about political violence. I'm talking about not only political violence, about religious violence. So we have a demonization, of course, at the beginning. We have words that are very that are sort of a stigma against, let's say, a group of people. I'm clearly making the case now of the Jews, but this is other groups may be taken into account, of course, also not only the Jews. But before arriving to violence, to physical violence, there is a gap, and this gap is filled by words, by speech, by hate speech. So again, we can express ideas, but some ideas can be very dangerous. Some ideas then start to getting mainstream and to be shared by people. And when they are shared by people, by a society as a whole, they can lead to atrocities. We have been seeing this, of course, at the utmost degree in the 20th centuries, of course. So when we have in the Soviet Union, when we have after the Bolshevik Revolution, we have Lenin calling bourgeois rats. They are rats. They are a lower form of human life, and this echoes very much what Adolf Hitler said, of course, of the Jews. Then we know that this way of expressing ideas, very strong, very violent ideas, can lead and has led, of course, to extreme violence. So I would be very, very careful to when we talk about free speech and we talk about tolerance, to underline the peril that is inherent in saying certain things and not saying other things. So I'm not advocating censorship, of course, but at a certain level, we also need to have a protection against minorities, against other people who can be victims, of course, of hate speech, of ideas that can turn to be very dangerous.
But to push back on what you're saying, at what point does that create protected classes of people that are beyond criticism?
Oh yes, sure, of course. Well, there can be also a weaponization of this kind of idea and getting people who are completely protected against any kind of criticism. And you are perfectly
because I would argue that's sort of happening in America with the Black community, and that's why we're seeing such backlash on X, for example, and even amongst the Black community themselves. Even there's a lot of videos going viral on YouTube right now from Black creators talking about Black fatigue. And I think the whole censorship complex built on the principle that you just mentioned sort of fed into that they were above criticism for so long.
It's true.
Well, I would add that some of what you're referring to also has to do with popular culture, because we've been inundated with agenda-driven publicity and advertising campaigns that are very propagandistic, that are saturated with messages that are not hidden at all, but rather that completely sidetrack from what they set out to do. And I think in our free market society, where everything is really about consuming, and that's including entertainment and news that poses, or entertainment that poses as information, in other words, news. We are so inundated with all of it, with also entertainment and information that is coercively crafted to bend our mindset. And I think that we humans have natural instincts to, and what I would call a bullshit-o-meter, that we start to pick up on it. But the thing is, it's unrelenting. And the fatigue word that you used is part of what's happening as a result of it, because it is coerced and it is artificial.
That's true. I can't disagree with you. Say there was a message being driven since maybe 2014, just down everyone's throat.
Can I share 2 live examples I experienced myself, and I would like to get your thoughts on that, whether it's something we should censor or not. So I don't know if you are familiar with this fact or not of my life, but I spent some time living in Krakow in Poland. Okay, and there are 2 things that there are a few things I'll never forget, but I'm just going to mention 2 now. One is when I encounter 2 lads dressed up with a Nazi uniform. Okay, and they were not taking the piss. They were just walking in the main square like they were not doing anything, say, unusual. Okay, they were big guys. They were bold. They were the hooligan type. So they were. I don't know if they were looking for trouble, but I would say so, because if you are dressed up in that uniform and walking around like you are the macho man of the main square, maybe you are looking for trouble. So what I did, I just walk away before there was some major issue, but I was not fully comfortable with that. Now I have to say, at least I knew what they stand for, because there are many hooligans and I know Frank lives in Budapest, so you are familiar with that. There are many hooligans living in that part of Europe, and they look for people to fight with. So at least I could see what kind of people I bump with. Okay, so that was the first. The second is back then I used to work at an office. Okay, and from one of the windows I could see a graffiti from the major football team, Wisła Krakow, who is openly known to be leaning pro-Nazi ideology. So they have a massive graffiti in Polish where it was written "Death to the Jews." Okay, and I was shocked because I would go every day to the office, look outside the window and see that graffiti there. Nothing has been done by the council. That graffiti, according to my colleagues, was already there for at least a year. And when I left 6 months after, nothing has changed. So the graffiti was still there, and maybe it's still there as we speak. I don't know, it was 10 years back, but it was there for quite some time. So I would like to get your thoughts on this, because there are like concrete cases. So do you think it's something which should censor, or just bring into attention of the individuals, the authorities? How would you go about escalating this thing? And I start with Erez as a lawyer.
First of all, I'm not excuse me, I'm not an expert on the right of freedom of speech. I would like to make the distinction between legitimate claims, factual claims, and I'll tell you in a second what I mean by that, and what I call the freedom of hate speech. Consider Galileo Galilei, what he said about the Earth circling the sun and not vice versa was very offensive, very, very offensive to the clergy at this time, to the extent that he was tried by the Inquisition and put first in arrest and then in house arrest, and his opinions stifled. Now, these were not something like a personal taste. These were facts that eventually were proven to be true, and the Inquisition and the Church were proven to be wrong. So this is one thing that we should be very wary of censoring. The other part of the spectrum, on the other end of the spectrum, there's hate speech. Going dressed as Nazis is something that is 100% intended to provoke and upset people. So this in this end of the spectrum, we should definitely consider the severity of the damage and insult to the people towards which these opinions were I'd say weaponized. So there's a host of considerations, and we need to weigh all of them. But one that I would like to add to the list, which I think is many times ignored, is the factual correctness of a claim. If you say something about a person and that person is insulted or otherwise damaged, in most countries he would be able to sue and even win the court case if the information spread about him was factually untrue. And I believe the same criteria should be applied to speech which is directed against communities, against certain populations, and against countries. And I'm saying that vis-a-vis the very miserable claim that the state of Israel, not the government, not a certain person, that he was too afraid to say, that the state of Israel kills babies as a hobby. I think that the consideration of whether that is true to any extent should serve as a criterion for allowing or disallowing the freedom of speech.
Should it be possible for a state or a community to say, Mr. So and so, and we're referring to this person in particular, you are no longer a member of the community to all intents, considerations, and purposes. You're free to say what you want, but we have a measure of freedom to recalibrate our relationship with such an individual.
Wouldn't that be stifling his opinions?
No, it wouldn't be stifling. He'd be perfectly free to express them. People expressing opinions have consequences. It's not as if he's being stopped from expressing an opinion, but obviously he expresses an opinion which is so offensive, which is so damaging as well. I think he has caused real damage to the state that people or a community can reassess and say, listen, we don't want you to be part of us. You are no longer part of us, in other words, which I think to a great extent many people will feel. Free speech has a price. Free speech isn't. Now, I think we're running the risk of conflating freedom with license. Okay, these are two distinct concepts. Freedom we're talking about the freedom of moral agents. So you have to understand the nature of the freedom you're dealing with. License is doing what you want, which isn't freedom. Okay, freedom requires limitation. We have to contract our sphere of action to a certain extent to have freedom within a society. Okay, license is to do what you want, but you can't really live in a society with which you espouse license and you just pick those elements that you want. This is what I'm trying to get at.
I think it's such a slippery slope, because I think what we're also talking about is people expressing themselves in what could be basically construed as extremely poor taste. People don't have to like it. Let's say you see two people and they're dressed like thugs and they're dressed in clothing with very triggering symbols that represent events in history that are documented as having been atrocities of mankind. On the other hand, they in my country right now, people are getting into trouble, physical trouble, and otherwise then more cancel culture to physical attacks if they're wearing a red MAGA cap, for instance. And so what is construed as offensive is a very quickly changing paradigm, I'm going to say if a couple of people are dressed like thugs in very incendiary clothing, if they're leaving me alone, if they're walking around, I don't have to like what they are wearing. I don't have to feel obliged to engage with them, but they're not controlling what I am wearing. And they're not
Indeed.
going to force me to think a certain way. So I think that the impingement of the rights happens when other people are forced to align with something else rather than just a person self-expressing. Because boy, oh boy, there sure are many examples of extremely poor ways of expressing oneself through fashion and clothing. Man has done that over all time.
Right. So let's just play another little game, okay? So try another little thought experiment, because let's take it. Suppose a woman decided that she wanted to be chained and led around on a leash by a man covered up in a chador. Okay, and this was a consensual arrangement. Would you be happy with that, and people espousing that, and with an increasing number of people behaving in such a way till they become a majority?
It's a good question. Absolutely not. I think there's a difference between speech and action. I mean, like
Okay.
Vitor's example of
Let me cut in.
graffiti.
Let me cut in there. But maybe these people are also making proselytes as well, and they're very successful at it as well. Now, this is an extreme experiment, but let's shift the focus on certain belief systems which espouse something which are not too far away from that. Okay, where women are covered up. Okay, and basically they're being subjugated in some way, and it's very apparent. And there are people who are espousing these views. They're doing it maybe outside of schools and in all sorts of places where people perhaps are vulnerable okay, to this type of thing. What do we do about that in our free speech environment? I don't call it freedom anymore. This is the subtle difference. I believe freedom is a moral construct, and you have to know how to put things together. You have to know how to articulate them. This is the point. It's not a free for all.
I'm just going to limit free speech to the written word in this case. And I think that's the best way to go about it.
But you're contracting it.
Arena.
Yeah. But that's a contraction. We're talking Speaker's Corner. Let's take Speaker's Corner in London. People making proselytes.
You can't just pull out your dong and balls on the Speaker's Corner. There's still there's other rules in our society that we must follow. And carrying someone around on a leash maybe we need some public decency
perfectly
laws
legal if it's consensual. It's perfectly legal.
Yeah, but maybe we need to bring back some old laws.
That's what I'm saying.
Think about
that's the whole point. That's the whole point.
Well, and you mentioned the word school, so you are implying this also includes exposure to humans who are not adults, and consensual states of mind is generally something between adults. And so children, their protection, which starts with the parents and the family, that is an entirely different ball of wax. And so the extent of exposure where children is concerned is, of course, an entirely higher level aspect of it.
I know, but we're getting for example, the age of consent in children is going down. It's not going up.
Okay. Yes, that is under some question and definite debate.
So what I'm saying is that the problem is we lack these firm. We're living in a very blurry environment. This is the thing where it's very difficult on the basis of a certain conceptions of freedom, which I don't believe is freedom. I believe it's license. Freedom has a moral value. It's a moral construct. The freedom of a moral agent is not the freedom to fly, okay, as a bird. The freedom of a bird is something else. This is the point. This is the distinction I'm trying to make. Niram, you've been too quiet for a while. Let me hear your dulcet tones.
No, I was listening carefully to what you were saying, and I think one of a very important concept that you repeated, Marco, is that there's a bit of conceptual confusion, according to me, between freedom and rules. I mean, one thinks that freedom is the opposite of rules, or freedom is the opposite of law. But of course, it doesn't work this way. because we cannot have freedom without rules, because otherwise freedom will turn out into chaos very, very, very easily, and it will turn out into the subjective idea of what freedom is and of what I would like to do, because I'm a free agent, I am a free being, and so I basically refer to my own desires, to my subjectivity, and unfortunately, we know that a human being is not so self-restrained, and so if he acts simply in relation to what his desires are, it turns out more he comes to be he turns out to be a sort of an ape, or even worse than that. And but we this question was very this problem was very seriously exposed to the most extreme level, again during the Enlightenment in the 18th century, by the Marquis de Sade. Alphonse Donatien de Sade had a very clear idea that freedom was exactly the fulfillment of one's own desires, and that was the most that a human being could achieve, the fulfillment of his own desires. And this, of course, destroyed to the core the rules of a society, and the rules of being together, because we have very, very nasty desires. And as you said before, freedom is a moral concept, and we have this made very clear in the Jewish, and not only in the Jewish, of course, also in the Christian, but also in the Muslim religion, that freedom cannot come without very clear rules of how to govern yourself, your appetites, and your thoughts. And I would like to say one more thing in relation to what Erez was saying before, and what you were saying also before about the case of Yair Golan and what he said. Well, in ancient Greece, there was the institution of ostracism. And so it worked in the way that it was thought that as a certain person who was thought of to cause a threat to the society, to the well-being of society, was put in the position to be expelled, not killed, but simply pushed out from the society itself, because he was considered to be beyond what was considered to be the virtue of the society and the well-being of a society. So, and this was an institution, a very serious institution in the Greek society. And when someone says something so incredibly nasty and false as saying that Israel delights, because if it's a hobby, it's a delight, it's a pleasure, delights in killing baby, it just repeats what has been called for many. It's a blood libel. This was something that went on in the Middle Ages. Jews were accused of killing Christian babies in order to get their blood and to use their blood. This is nothing more than a blood libel. And if a Jew doesn't know this and says something of this kind, well, it's above understanding. It's above comprehension. It's above justification, according to me. In the ancient Greek society, he will be ostracized by the society itself.
I'd like to just add that when you're talking about de Sade, I mean, he did most of his writing in prison. So there's an interesting irony there.
Of course.
Vitor, you've been too silent. Exercise your freedom of speech.
Well, thank you for allowing me to speak my mind here. I was just thinking, how bad are we now? Because I think a lot have changed maybe since the beginning of the year in terms of censorship, cancel culture. I think the backlash hasn't been as effective as it is now, especially after X being taken over by Elon Musk and all that. So I'll be interested in your thoughts on whether we are at the peak of the censorship or we are somehow going in the right direction. So I'm going to start with Otter on this.
What was the question? Sorry.
Yes, so the question will be around whether are we at the peak of the censorship in terms of cancel culture and all that good stuff, or we are already correcting ourselves as in civilization.
No, I don't think so. I think people are just regressing into tribalism right now, because I see it on the right wing where everyone is so adamant about canceling cancel culture. And now that cancel culture is canceled, people on the right are trying to cancel each other, and they're trying to find this center ground because they don't really have thought out ideology yet. So Trumpism is kind of ephemeral at the moment. So everyone's kind of fighting and canceling each other, kind of coalesce a new tribal identity. So I think we're going through multiple identity crises in the political sphere, perhaps the intellectual sphere as well. And we've only seen the beginning, I think, unfortunately.
On that note, let me pass it to Kimann, since she's based in the US. Do you think there is a split among the right when it comes to the topic of freedom of speech in the US, or they are united on that regard?
Yeah, so circling back to a few of the other comments that we have had, the strange thing is we're at a fever pitch here. It's largely fueled by social media and technology and entertainment consumption, which has everyone clicking and commenting and making all kinds of expressions and disparaging comments all the time. I mean, we talked earlier of the extreme concepts between expressing oneself as a Nazi. Well, we have an entire part of the country where there are people that will very glibly call the opposition, which is to say conservative Republican supporters, they're literally being called Nazis. I have seen this on social media. I am kind of in a center-right position. I have defaulted away from some of the positions over the years because the judgmentalism is enormous. And I'm going to go right back to my comments about virtue and the way that some people seem to have a handle on what is virtuous. And if it's not the way they see it, it can't possibly be virtuous at all. And so here in the US, it's very watered down, it's very trivialized, but we're also very saturated in that. And that's unfortunate because it is separating us, even in, for instance, the arts world where people can be brought together. People and their beliefs are continuously being expressed in ways that weaponize us against each other, and it just dilutes the whole thing.
Niram, I'm curious on your view when it comes to Italy, because every time I talk to people, not only in Ireland, but let's say all over Europe, Italy is seen as the role model because most people believe that Giorgia Meloni is promoting only positive things when it comes to freedom, not siding with the EU, you know, all that orientation. But I don't think they're totally right, but I would like to get your insight since you are based in Milan. So how well is doing Italy on the freedom of speech when it comes to the government?
Well, this government is a center-right government, really. And when Giorgia Meloni was thought that she was going to become the prime minister, of course, she was on the left. They were screaming. They were completely hysterical about fascism coming back to Italy. And of course, fascism didn't come back to Italy. But this is something that goes on has been going on in the United States with Donald Trump, of course. It has been going on, and it's going on with Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel for the last 10 years. We've been hearing that Netanyahu is like Ceausescu, for example, and it's completely ridiculous. But going back to Italy, no, in Italy, the situation is, well, here in Italy, we have this very old habit of going along with accommodating things. We are very very clever in this kind of approach to reality, and so maybe we start with a it seems that we go in one direction, but then if it's more convenient, we will change and go in the opposite direction. And so this we call this coherence, and it's the way we've been doing it we've been doing politics for centuries and centuries, and we've been working this way along the centuries. So now we have, as you said before, we have a right-wing government, which has a few things that are considered to be can be considered to be right-wing, but it's very very mild. It's very in comparison to Otter lives in Hungary, and so it's very very mild in comparison to, of course, to what happens, the approach that Orbán has. In relation to many things, freedom of speech or freedom of the press, etc., etc. Here in Italy, they are afraid, very, very afraid of being called fascist. So if something bad happens, for example, the police is held back. As I said before, what happened at the University of Turin, if it had happened in the United States, for example, and we've been seeing this going on for a long time, at Columbia University, at Harvard, where people were screaming "Free Palestine" from the river to the sea, wearing Hamas badges, and wearing and showing Hamas flags. And at the beginning they were allowed to do so, but then suddenly that was stopped. It was stopped, and we saw police going to the university, the Columbia University in New York, going in Harvard and out in other places, and dragging these people away. In Italy, this will not happen. This will not happen, because if it happens immediately, we will have the left screaming and saying that the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, is a fascist, and she doesn't like to be called a fascist. So I much prefer her to be called a fascist and keep the order and keep the rule of order, than not of being called a fascist and letting things just go by. This is my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think Italy is very similar to Portugal, given that we had a dictatorship leaning towards the right. So there's a sort of, say, trauma that has been leveraged by the left in a very nasty way. Like, as a matter of fact, we had the elections on Sunday in Portugal, and the so-called far right finished second, and the left was not. The left was open about it. They didn't say that they want these guys to be stopped. They say they want these guys to be murdered, and I'm quoting it. Like, this is on the news. Like, you can check it out yourselves. They say this party, not the front men, not the individuals, but they say this party must be murdered, in those words. So if this is not anti-democratic, I don't know what's the concept of being anti-democratic. Erez, over to you. Israel is a very complex society, as we know, and that's why I like it so much. You have these Hasidics who are given some exceptions, given their religious duties, and people who complain about the freedoms they can avail. Then we have the very progressives in Tel Aviv, flying rainbows over here. Where does the freedom stand in Israel?
Well, some would say that Israel is too free in a sense, but I think the I would like to take on Kimann's remark before about the social networks, social media being weaponized and against each other. I think, excuse me, that each of us, whether from the left of or the right, whether a Republican or a Democrat, whether a socialist or a capitalist, should apply the same criteria to the other party's freedom of speech. If in the name of democracy and freedom of speech you stifle people, you prevent people from practicing their religion, you don't allow people to voice opinions, then you are committing the sin of being insincere, because you don't really mean the freedom of speech, you don't really mean democracy. You mean democracy to you. You mean freedom to you. You mean your own rights, and whatever happens with the other people's rights. And that applies to the ultra-religious, who not only are exempt from military service to an extent, but it also applies to people who want to um, uh, have gay parades in ultra religious communities, in the sense that my freedom to express my sexual orientation is more important than someone else's right to educate his children without this spectacle just on the street they live in.
You raise a very interesting point, Erez. You raise a very interesting point, which sort of resonates with what I was saying before about the moral language here. There are some serious short circuits, put it this way, in the system. Things that would have been unthinkable 30 or 40 years ago happen now on a regular basis, whether we agree with it or we don't. There is a crisis. I think it's quite evident. And I would like to pick you up on another thing. We speak about freedom of speech, but also what level of, I believe we have a related subject, the level of influence that someone should have as well. Because, of course, freedom of speech and freedom of expression are also, to a certain extent, linked to freedom of representation and the right to representation. Should somebody who is out of sync, let's say, with a national narrative or a national project, and I think I'm referring in this specific case to Israel, have the same representation? Should their speech have the same weight? For let's say this: Israel is constitutionally, even if it is implicit and not a written, it is a Jewish state. And here we have a problem. I beg your pardon?
Isn't that democracy?
It is democracy. It is democracy, but it's also a democracy that can be subverted. And democracies have rules. So what I'm saying here is, and we have the should people who are at odds with the national ethos be allowed to have representation in parliament? And that's, I'm not just saying people who don't agree, I'm also saying in Israel we have people who support terrorism, who are elected members of the Knesset. And if they're elected members of the Knesset, it's because people have freely chosen to do so. So we have some little issues here in our conception of democracy as being simply a question of numbers. What's your view on that? And then I'll ask Niram. Should somebody who supports the PLO or a PA state have the same influence in the running of a country to which is imposed conceptually?
I think that every opinion should be represented equally, in the sense that it should be represented, um, let's say, to the extent that that opinion is supported in the public. Let's say that those people who support Hamas represent 5% of the population in Israel. And theoretically, they are represented by 5% of the members of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. That's fine. I don't see, to a certain extent, there was one who actually helped to helped Hezbollah with targets.
Yes, that's right.
was
That's
one.
right.
That,
Yes,
that is treason. Of course,
but
I'm
he's
not-
not Erez, he's not really an exception in conceptual terms. They all
not-
want they all want the destruction of the state of Israel or its collapse.
I
Okay,
think
it's death by cuts or death by guillotine.
that's right, and I believe that they are entitled to their opinions and views. What I resent is the fact that they are overrepresented in the media, in public conversations and dialogues, in the newspaper, in street signs, because, and that brings us to a point concerning Hungary, because they are supported by hostile forces from outside Israel that supply finance and backing to destabilize the country.
Yeah.
Indeed,
So
indeed.
I think
But that's my
it's
whole
this-
point. That's my whole point, Erez. That's my whole point. They are essentially speaking, and there's no point in beating about the bush here. They are a fifth column. Oh, they are a fifth column. They want the destruction of a state in which they invoke rights by this very state.
that should be a red line. I agree with you.
Yeah, so that's
Agree
right.
with
And
you.
this can apply to the United States as well. Should someone who's opposed to the very essence of American values have representation in the United States? Because in theory, somebody like this could run for president.
Well, we do have elected leaders, members of Congress who are notably far, of course, they call themselves progressive, not big Hamas supporters, anti-Semitic. We have those elected leaders. I find it fascinating that they're elected. But on the other hand, if we strip away the individual casting a vote, which is such a beautiful thing, and then we start to follow the money and we start to look at the power games that are at play globally, well, then of course this is all part of something much bigger. And I would still say I would rather have it be on the surface so we can track it, measure it, we can gauge it, we can value it, we can speak against it, rather than forcing it all underground. Because if that underbelly is hidden, I think that's where it becomes more dangerous.
But how transparent is it actually, though? I mean, it's a bit murky. Like in America, you at least have the super PACs and PACs, so you can track a little bit of it. But how much of it's going underneath the table? I think a good amount. And I would posit that maybe democracy just doesn't work at all.
It's
Always
not.
follow the money.
Yeah, in a sense, democracy has to have rules. Clubs have to have rules. Okay, looking at it on a micro level. To allow in America, the situation isn't quite what it is in Israel. But if you had 20% of the population who are potentially inimical to the very security of the state, I think you'd be speaking in different terms. But I understand your point of view, and I accept it. Point taken. Here we have a different situation where people actively work against and consort with basically people who are who have gone a step worse than the Nazis. Okay, we have people who support Hamas. Not that the PA is any different, but this is the issue that I'm talking about. But anyway, it's interesting. We're testing it. Okay, Niram, your thoughts?
Well, I thought for example, let's take the example of NGOs. And Otter was talking about them before at the beginning, and we know the attitude that Ben has towards them. And I think that Israel would that to this extent should do what Orban has been doing in Hungary for the young NGOs.
Absolutely.
Because these NGOs, we know exactly who finances them. We know where the money comes
the
from.
Weapons.
Exactly. Very simple stated. Exactly. They are just weapons. So it's not the demonization of Mr. George Soros, but we know that this is clearly stated by him. Who told it.
He sucks.
He said exactly what his plans are. He thinks he's the Messiah. He thinks he's the Messiah. He has this megalomaniac idea of himself. And he works to undermine the stability of Israel,
of many Western nations,
and this in Hungary and in other places. So and we know where the money comes from. For example, the United States, we have there is a big problem in the United States that comes from Qatar. Qatar is pouring tons of money, billions of dollars into the United States system. And recently, and I advise who has not read this to read it carefully and thoroughly, because the Free Press has been publishing a very, very dense and long article about the influence of Qatar in the United States, and stating exactly where they are, how much they have been lobbying, where they are lobbying, where they are putting their money. So, as you said before, follow the money. Sometimes we can follow the money very clearly. Sometimes, as Otter said before, we cannot follow the money. We don't know. But the example of the NGOs is very clear. It's very clear. And Israel is in a position. It's too free, Israel, in this sense. It's too democratically free, as Erez said before. And democracy, and I go back to what Otter said before. Yes, it's very, very porous. It's a very, very, very. It can be a very, very porous system. Everything can get inside it, but this is not the essence of democracy. That everything can get inside it. Democracy needs also protection from viruses and from poison, because otherwise it's the end of democracy itself. And in Israel, there was in the 80s, the party of Meir Kahane was outlawed. He won, and they wrote a law in order for him not to go to the Knesset. Is this an example of democracy? But now we have at the Knesset parties that are outspokenly against Israel and want the destruction of Israel. But Meir Kahane could not go there because he was thought to
you're
be
perfectly right.
So
you
have this
right.
for example. No,
you're absolutely right.
I think the rule should be that a democracy, and when I'm saying democracy, I mean the whole set of freedoms, religion, political, right of speech, etc. Democracies should defend themselves, and they should defend themselves. Had Germany in the 30s defended itself against the anti-democratic forces of Hitler, not only Hitler, it would have prevented the Second World War and the Holocaust. And the problem is that speech is many times weaponized by anti-democratic forces against the democracy, against its stability, against its cohesiveness in terms of public opinion and national feelings.
Well, America started out as a republic, and I think that's a good model where you sort of limit the influence of the mob. And it worked well for some time, but I think where they made a mistake is that too many people didn't have a voice in that system. So how do you balance perhaps the intellectual and merchant and political elite maybe should have some more say because they have more invested in the stability of the nation, but you do need systems that all the other people who have a lesser role in the society or less money need to have some way to share their voice as well. So maybe it's a balancing act. Maybe we're doing it the wrong way by letting everyone dictate, and then it just becomes a mob rule because you appeal to the mob to get into the office of president, and then you appeal to the mob with your policies, and what really gets fixed? And in 4 years, you're gone, and you're working on your campaign in the last year, so nothing gets done at all. It's a very inefficient system if you think about it.
Has it become an inefficient system, or was it always that way, in your opinion, politically speaking?
Not always, because there was more leeway 100 years ago for a democratic system to do illiberal things. Like if you think about FDR's whole Great Society, sorry, that was LBJ, the New Deal rather.
Right.
I mean, that would not fly nowadays. It would be unconstitutional, but he forced it through anyway. And you can pick out numerous examples in early democracies of what almost seems like monarchic rule.
You're right. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, a lot of the inefficiency is also because from one administration to the next, people are simply literally undoing what the previous one did. I mean, who knows in a few years if we have a switch in the administration again, a regime change, everything will get undone once over. I mean, we've had incredible waste as a result of it, which is just so bizarre. It's very poor. It's very poorly run business when it's done that way. But that's a part of the polarization. That's a manifestation of it because we have factions that think so differently that they're simply wanting to undo what the previous person did. And I think it's wasteful. I think it's unfortunate where we're seeing it happen right now. And what will we see in a few more years if it happens again?
Right. What do you see as the reason for this polarization? Because once upon a time, I suppose 40, 50 years ago, Republican or Democrat, perhaps there wasn't such a huge difference. Correct me if I'm wrong. Perhaps they sort of in foreign policy, more or less there was a convergence.
At points.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong.
There's always polarization, but I mean, I think what we see now.
Yeah. It seems as if they speak two different languages. Yeah.
Revoking everything on day one. I mean, that's a huge change in the way things were done before.
Right. It seems as if they speak different languages. Let me be frank. I'm going to use that.
Actually, they do. They do. The different parties really literally employ their words. They have rewritten definitions literally to words. It's very Orwellian.
Yes, indeed. This is the point that why has this come about, do you think, aside from new ideologies and schools of thought? What have been the driving forces in this? Of course, Niram mentioned we have foreign influence as well, which has corrupted the American system, or financing of universities from foreign powers, which we've already mentioned. What do you see as the forces which have caused the breakdown of a common language?
I see it as just the will to get reelected, just at any means possible.
Right, but it has to come from the bottom up, and something must be happening on the ground that gives political expression to a certain extent.
Tribalism, as Otter said before, tribalism.
Yeah,
we are in a society. Yes, it's really quite astonishing. But we see this very, very clearly now. We live in a more tribal society than we did before. Maybe before we had more sense of, there was a sort of facade that was kept us really protected by this sort of awareness about how tribal we are. But basically, we are the human being is tribal. So
Right,
it has this approach, no. So it's not
Right.
something which is happens right now. In certain it has always been like this during all of human history. And now it's even more clear than before. And I think this is it's clearer than before because now we have social media, we have internet, we have all this. We can see this more clearly than we did before. If you go on Facebook or you go on Twitter or X as it is called right now, and you see that there are just tribes one against the other. So it's like going, yeah. It's I mean, and in Israel, Erez knows this very well. This is very, very, very clear. But also in American society, of course, it is. In American society, it's very, very clear. Here in Italy, it's also here in Italy, but it's more, it's less black and white as it is, for example, in the Middle East, or as it is, for example, in the United States. So we have sort of, it's more nuanced, let's say so. But when you go on the internet, you see just black and white, and so this is, for me, it's one of the most striking features of our epoch right now.
Which we should
Do you
also
guys think that? Sorry, just one question for the Americans and for the others. So, do you guys think that polarization is somehow a model that the states created and is being exported to the road? I know Otter, you maybe want to say something on this because we're very critical of the American thing being expanded.
I don't think it's just that, though. I think I'm going to defer to Chomsky and Edward Herman on this with manufacturing consent. You're creating a tribe. You're taking a problem in society, you're amplifying it, you're creating frustration around it, and you're creating an interest group that can now fight against the other interest group in the political arena. And it's worse in America because it's a two-party system. In Hungary, it's a two-party system, sorta, because the opposition's all one, really. And maybe in other countries, you have a little bit more discussion. Like Germany, there's at least 4 different parties in the fray. But I think we're all achieving the same ends here. We're manufacturing consent to get our votes.
We should also consider
and use. Just pure use. We're plugged into the matrix. It's driving, and the discourse and the lack of civility is keeping the use up, and we are the drivers of it. Look at Mark Zuckerberg, basically a jerk who wanted to judge girls when he was in college. He coercively gives birth to Facebook, and now he is talking about how AI, after he completely bastardized the definition of the word friend, now he is suggesting that AI can start to replace that friend that one will have lost. Well, if that's not something coming full circle in terms of big money making societal change, that's huge.
Yeah,
I think we should also consider
something.
Go ahead, sorry.
I think we should also consider the move from fact to feeling. At one time, there was at least the pretense to say that if you call someone a Nazi, you can somehow base that on facts. Today, and especially in the social media, there is no such presumption. You can call someone a Nazi because you don't like him. You don't need to say he wants to exterminate someone. You can say he wants to exterminate, and you don't have to back it with any fact. It's enough that that's the way you feel. So I think that's one of the worst moves that humanity is undergoing.
Yeah, and I would just add on that everyone is called a Nazi, as quick as we don't like that person, and then communist. Now it's a compliment. That's something new. Back in the days, it wasn't, but now it's a compliment. It's a compliment that you stand for human rights. We are all about the oppressed. Being communist is a good thing. Someone say that they should read history again. That's simple.
Yeah,
Go on, open that book.
You raise an interesting point. It doesn't carry quite the same stigma for some reason, but there are reasons it's a bit more tricky than that. A little more tricky than
but we
that.
know now, because the Stalinist regime was very secretive, but we know now what happened. So there's
we do. But I think there is a
maybe I don't know.
Yeah, no, there was a little bit of a different dynamic. People, I mean, you could hardly say a Nazi, somebody who wanted to destroy other nations, was in good faith. Some people were fooled into being communists because they thought of it as some kind of liberation, as something messianic for all mankind. So I think there's a slightly, even though the crimes we could put. Maybe I'm not saying that.
Similar feeling though, because Nazism is about your nation, your people, and putting them above everyone else. And I guess communism is the whole world, but it's a similar end, right? It's a very socialist movement at the end of the day. It's about trying to help everyone in your society.
Again, you're using, not you, of course, people are using ignorance to the extent of denial of truth. They don't want to know that no communist experiment has ever succeeded. They don't want to, dive into the facts and say you're not because you say something. That's just
you're right. In this sense, it was a political failure. What I'm saying is that a person, to a certain extent, somebody who was a communist, to a certain extent, saw resonances with previous values, even though it was mistaken. And I'm certainly not being the advocate of the communism, but I know communist people who I could say were basically decent people. I can't think of a Nazi whom I could think of as a decent person. So I think there's a difference there. But anyway,
I agree with you, Marco. I agree with you on that.
But simply because communism had a humanitarian facade, and it had this allure that Nazism didn't have.
Indeed.
I would argue it did, just
and
not
maybe
for
even
minorities, just only for one group.
Maybe it was even more pernicious. Maybe
it was extremely pernicious, of course, but it was presenting itself with this fake humanitarian and noble.
I agree with you.
Facade, of course. Hitler was very, very clear about what he was.
But you will agree with me. No, but you will agree with me on the other hand too that many decent people were taken in. They were fooled by this. They were fooled.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's I would also have to raise that early communists were very much agitators against religion as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So there's a lot of exclusionary behavior from communists as well.
Oh, absolutely.
They shouldn't be given a pass on there.
Believe you me,
fact here, if you don't mind, Marco. Just throw a fact here for the communist crew out there. So as I said, in Portugal, we had elections on Sunday. The votation finished on Sunday. The results are nearly finalized, but there is a fraction that hasn't arrived yet to Portugal, which is people like me who live outside of the country. Okay, so where I'm going with that. The far left already knows that they won't get any more MPs because whoever lives outside of the country, who has life experience, who read some books, especially those who live in Eastern Europe, they will never ever vote Communist Party. Okay, as a matter of fact, Otter, As you know, I lived in Hungary. We met quite a few times, and I had opportunity to see the results in Hungary. There was not one single vote for the far left, and that's a pattern all over Eastern Europe, because people know the Portuguese people who live in Eastern Europe. They talk to locals, and they see the atrocities that the communists did. They equal them to the Nazis. With, of course, there are some decent people among the mix, but if not the history books, life experience will tell you that there is nothing good in that ideology.
No, we're in agreement on that. There's no, I don't think there's any disagreement on that. Eastern Europe, the Eastern European experience, people there lived it. They lived it, so they've developed the immune system is much stronger. In Italy, on the hand, Niram, I think we have a different situation where people didn't fully understand the beauty.
Completely. Because here in Italy we have fascism, so the danger is always
Indeed,
the comeback of fascism. Even if we had the strongest communist party of Europe, was the Italian party, was the Italian Communist Party, of course.
Niram, that's right. Is it stronger than ours? How many MPs you have in the parliament
now?
Yeah, in the Italian parliament, how many communist representatives you have?
Not officially.
We beat Italy. We have three communist party individuals in the party. Portugal 3, Italy 0. We won.
We had one in the 90s. We had one which was called Rifondazione Comunista. So they were just they were looking to communism as something that was to be brought back again.
Indeed, so, Rifondazione, yes, with Fausto,
exactly.
with Fausto.
Bring back to the foundation.
And Marco, we have a party that when the previous scheme, because that's why I call him, the previous scheme passed, they asked the parliament for a minute of silence. So that's how communist they are,
In Italy, Niram. The old. I had my grandfather was a communist partisan. Let me be perfectly frank. I mean, and so I understand from close up what kind of a mindset they have. But in Italy, the old saying, many people went up the mountains in a black shirt and came down in a red shirt, which you're familiar with. The only thing he did, he was a communist from the outset. As we say in Italian, comunista della prima ora, which was his own. So I know communist.
Yeah, but I have this understanding. I really do have this understanding for people who, at the beginning, at the outset, after the Bolshevik Revolution, they thought really that this was something that was going to do good for humanity. People that went. Well, you just think about George Orwell, for example, and how he changed completely his mind. Arthur Koestler and other, these people were humanitarians. They really had a big heart, and they thought that this was something that was going to work well. And when they even understood very, very early that it was not going to go well, they wrote it down. They wrote about it and they exposed it. So in this sense, I do understand them, and I cannot condemn them.
No. I now that you mention Arthur Koestler, he wrote a very unfortunate book, which was basically. Are you familiar with the book I'm talking about? The 13th Tribe, which also was a series of falsehoods. Are you familiar with that? My Erez, that book by Arthur Koestler.
Afraid not.
It's a book on which many Palestinists draw upon to undermine the Jewish connection with the land of Israel. It's a load of rubbish, actually, because I have the book. But
well, it's interesting you mentioned this book because it's a paradox, because Arthur Koestler wrote this book in order to undermine the racial theory of the Nazis by stating that really there was no Jewish purity, and that the Jewish people were were not really a cohesive, coherent, genetical, racial population. And he was wrong in this sense. He was wrong, and nowadays, paradoxically, those that fight against the Jews, that say that the Jews has no real connection to the land of Israel, they say because they are not really a people.
They're not from this area.
They are not from this area. So you see how things can change and can be twisted completely.
Indeed.
Because Arthur Koestler wrote this book in order to undermine something that was really evil, but he couldn't think that 50, 60, 70 years later his book was going to use against the Jews.
Indeed, and it's you'll find that it's been certain people, propagandists have latched onto it with a limited amount of success. It's been disproved.
Why burden hate speech with facts? They are free from that. They can say anything. They can do anything.
Indeed,
they don't have to prove anything. They just shout louder.
That's correct. That's very much the case.
Well, there's definitely a big communist connection with supporting Palestine historically. If you think about Jean-Paul Sartre and the French elite, until 1956,
that's correct.
Started to revise their communist views thanks to the Hungarian Revolution.
That's correct. That's correct.
So bear in mind,
bear in mind that Italian newspapers, even on the left, and I speak about l'Unità, up until 1956, they often condemned they don't condemn Palestinian because they didn't even use the term in 1956.
There were no Palestinians then.
There were no Palestinians to condemn. Very often that they were ostensibly pro-Israel, certainly not because of Judaism, because of the socialist template on which it was based, and also within a Cold War logic of taking the opposing side. But nowadays, certainly, the left is primarily the motor of modern-day anti-Semitism. I think that's quite clear. Yeah.
I think that people also use economic power to force their opinions on others and stifle others' opinions. And there's a current example in Israel. Air conditioner manufacturer took for one of its commercials someone who he's Iranian in origin. He lived in Iran. He grew up with the Iranians. He studied about the Middle East, and he has very firm right-wing opinions.
Yeah.
There was a storm of hate speech intended to force the air condition manufacturer to stop using the services and to take down the commercial, meaning that the people who have the power want to stifle other opinions by keeping them out of the public arena, even in a commercial.
Yeah.
And I would like to say that I personally have felt more than once that my livelihood is being has been damaged by my opinions.
Yeah,
because people are not interested about the quality of work I do. They say, okay, this guy thinks that A, B, or C. Well, while I believe in X, I don't want to work with him. He's not a human. He's a traitor. He's
Yes, no, that's
Whatever.
perfectly right. It's part of cancel culture. Indeed, people have had their bank accounts extinguished because of this as well. You raise a very interesting point, and you also raise another interesting point, which is actually directly related to free speech. When you have this drowning out of opinions, free speech loses value. Because free speech only has value in an environment where it can gain expression and be heard, and where it's anyway.
Very
We saw
astute
this.
points.
We saw this 8 years ago. No, after when Trump was not elected, when Trump was defeated, he was completely cancelled.
Yes,
They
indeed.
just erased. Yes, they just erased him. He was.
Yes,
They just said, "Okay, now what can we do with this guy? We cannot kill him physically. We will kill him. So socially, we will kill him
yes, that's right.
on the internet, and he will just disappear."
Yes, and it was brazen-faced, brazen-faced. Absolutely,
And we,
yes.
and we see
There,
that
there are prime time
in Germany
programs.
with the AfD, Le Pen party, and some other parties who are being threatened for illegalization. I think that's
Yes.
next step. If they cannot stop those movements on elections, on social media, I think they're gonna go next level, which is using the judicial system, and that's very scary.
They're
because
already
doing
using
it
the
we
there.
can have this
judicial-
conversation,
yeah,
all of a sudden our laptops don't work. That's it.
yeah. The judicial system has
They
already
have.
been harnessed.
Look what's going on in Israel.
Absolutely.
Look what's going on.
Yeah, and in Italy too, because I remember when Berlusconi was prime minister, he was submerged with lawsuits.
Yes, indeed. But as you know very well, in Italy we have a constitution, and Israel lacks a constitution, and so the power.
Well, yes and no. It lacks, but it's implicit. I mean,
It's implicit.
even a constitution can be played with and tampered with.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But the power of the judges, the power, there is no. Now this is another issue, and we've been talking about this previously. There is no other country, to my knowledge, in the Western tradition where the judges have the power that they have in Israel.
You're absolutely right. No, without a shadow of a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt.
That's a problem in America too.
My point is that even with a constitution, once
you're right.
you have what did I want to say? I remember in it. I worked as an interpreter also in courthouses in Italy, and there it is pretty clear that people have hanging on their walls judges. Democratic judges, and you know the story behind that. Once you have that hanging in their offices, it's on display. There's something seriously wrong with the judicial system.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So I think we must come to an end. It's now more than 90 minutes, but there was a lot to be
You're going
said.
to have to pay me more for that.
So
Overtime.
you're gonna be paid with gold. Going to be paid with
golden
gold,
sausage, a golden sausage.
The famous golden sausage. Yeah,
We'll have to.
We need to bring it back to the stage. By the way,
we have to. Perhaps with the agreement of we could have a 15-minute slot where we assign the golden sausage.
Let's just tell Otter and Kimann what the golden sausage is, because probably they're not familiar with it.
I'm wondering what that is.
So for quite some time, especially the beginning, I think for a month, myself and Marco awarded clever individuals, the likes of Keir Starmer in the UK, so our favorite politicians and other celebrities with the golden sausage, because we want to recognize their skills in public. So that's a story behind the golden sausage.
Yeah, the sausagery. Yeah. And it started with when we drew inspiration from Keir Starmer's speech at the Labour Party conference, where he instead of saying hostages, he said free the sausages. So it's sort of that was the we're indebted to Keir Starmer for his sausagery. Put it that way.
We will ever be, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking in my records. Oh, I found one. Can Can I show it?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let's bring it back to the stage.
Oh,
Here
there
it
it is. There it is in all its glory.
It's here, fresh. It's still
Yeah,
fresh
yeah.
for the next individual.
Okay, so we'll assign a 15-minute weekly slot where a deserving person will be awarded. And we could do it in Italian too, Niram. What do you say?
Of course, why not? Why not?
Could-
I look forward to it.
Good. We'll discuss it because Italy has many qualified individuals.
Absolutely.
I was thinking of somebody. Well, I'll tell you in private.
Okay.
I've got some ideas. I'll tell people in private. Has to be a surprise.
Let me remove the sausage from the screen. By the way, we have a comment here before we drop. Someone is very interested in Kimann. Nekot is asking if you have a channel, Kimann.
I do. So it is in connection with my writing. Although I have done popular culture and some history and what I like to say Pollyanna polemic writing, my focus these days is horror and science fiction literature. And so, yes, Butterfly Broth on YouTube. And I also have various social media accounts. I am constantly posting to all of those. And so thank you for asking.
Good stuff. Okay, so guys, thank you very much for the insights. I think we could be here forever talking about free speech. It's an endless topic, and there is a lot to be said from multiple angles. But you are always welcome to return and discuss with us other topics, and even have your word about the next golden sausage. Why not? No? So thanks very
Thank
much.
you for letting me join. Thank you.
Let me just tell the
Thank you.
audience we'll be here next
Thanks.
Wednesday. We still haven't choose the topic.
We have
something interesting.
chosen.
And yeah, so if you enjoyed this conversation, please give us not a golden sausage, but a thumbs up below. And if you are interested in watching what we have in the pipeline, subscribe, click that bell, and share with someone who's interested in these filtered conversations we hold here every Wednesday. So take care, everybody, and talk soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.